All right. Hey, this Sunday we remember Numbers 13, 17 through 31. And I would call this lesson Failing the Test of Faith. And I want to start off with a verse from Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 2, which states, "It is an 11 days journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea." I think it's important to remind your students in your class of the fact that this wasn't a long distance that they needed to go as they left Egypt to get to the promised land. It's a matter of unbelief. And they're a perfect example of how to turn an 11-day journey into a 40-year death march. And it really comes to a climax here as they get on the brink of the promised land, and God instructs Moses to send them out to spy the land. So why didn't they enter? Well, because they allowed fear to overcome faith, despite what God promised them. So I think there's another need to remind your class of the clear promise of God about this land. It goes all the way back to the promise he made to Abraham in Genesis 12, 1 and 2. "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and from your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I'll make of you a great nation, and I'll bless you and make your name great, so that you'll be a blessing." And later on, I forgot to mark verse 7, same chapter, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land." And then in Genesis 15, we see the promise repeated, along with the incident of the God coming down, the lamp going through the parts of the animal, etc., to demonstrate the unconditional nature of the covenant. It says, "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt, the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." So later in our lesson, when you see the emphasis of the people being strong, even though the sons of Anak are not mentioned in that expression, God's already told them they'll have victory over these people. So, and we see that again in Numbers chapter 10, just a few chapters prior to this chapter. It says, "When you go to war in your land against the adversary who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God, and you shall be saved from your enemies." So you got a promise of the land, that God is going to give it to them, and then you have a promise regarding the people, that he's going to take care of the people. He's going to enable you to have victory over the people. In fact, Abraham already journeyed. Abraham already made the journey that these spies are about to make. In fact, he actually lived in the land. Genesis 13, 17, "Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." That's God speaking to Abram. So this whole incident is a perfect example of faith that's tested, and in this case failed, except for Caleb and Joshua. Joshua is not mentioned by name in this passage, but he is mentioned in chapter 14, verse 6, as the other spy that gives a good report. So again, it's a perfect example of Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. In this case, well, in all cases, things we hope for because God has promised them. That's why I'm emphasizing those promises. The evidence of things not seen. Moses sends them in and tells them to report on the people, the land, and the cities. So what could they see? They saw intimidating people, they saw fortified lands, but they also saw incredible fruit and produce in abundance and in measurements we can't even fathom. So not only did they ignore God's promise, but they ignored the evidence God graciously showed them about the awesome land that he had in store for them. Instead, they focused on the obstacle of their people and their fortification. However, hadn't God already shown them his power in delivering over people, over insurmountable obstacles like a sea? I mean, he's already demonstrated his awesome power and his ability to defeat the army of the Egyptians. I would say the army of the Egyptians, and even just leaving Egypt at all, was a bigger obstacle than the people of this land. So God asks us to live by faith, but he also shows us time and time again his power and his faithfulness. So he doesn't leave our faith up to just blind faith. We do have evidence, we do have promises, we do have examples of God's power all around us. So I think a good question, a good discussion question for your class are, what are the giants today that are causing them to be afraid or discouraged, keeping them from obeying the Lord, keeping them from living by faith in all that God has promised them? And you think of the difficult times that are going on in our nation right now, and it's easy to get discouraged and think evil's winning, Satan's winning, and what's the future for our kids and all that kind of thing. That's the same fear they had here. What's the future of them and their kids? We have to put our trust in God, in God's promises. So when he sends out the spies, he tells them to bring back the fruit of the land. And it's interesting, in verse 20, he tells them, depending on what translation you're using, to be strong or to be courageous, or literally to use your strength. Use your strength to bring back this produce that is in the land. But instead, they return and emphasize the strength of the people. Verse 28, nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong. So that's always going to be the battle that we face. Are we going to focus on God's promises and God's power, or are we going to focus on what we can see? And a lot of times what we can see seems to contradict God's promises, or are just obstacles that are so huge we don't feel that we can overcome them. Lastly, just notice the severe consequences of their unbelief. Numbers 14, verses 37 and 38, we see the consequences specifically to the 10 spies. The men who brought up a bad report of the land died by plague from the Lord. Of those men who went to spy out the land, only Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive. And what's interesting is God uses Joshua to defeat the people. Okay, the two things that they struggled with were the people and I'm having a brain freeze because I didn't have this part written down. And the land. The land would swallow them up. Caleb goes in and defeats the giants. I get it backwards. He defeats those giants. Joshua helps them conquer the rest of the people and conquers the land later on, this next generation that goes into the land. So the two very things they were afraid of, these two men were pivotal in dealing with both of those things. So you have consequences to the 10 spies, and then of course consequences to the people who listened to them. Numbers 14, verse 22 and 23, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers, and none of those who despise me shall see it. So maybe a concluding question I'll leave you with, and you can do with what you want with your class. But what are we in danger of missing out on because we give in to fear as opposed to living by faith? Now, the curriculum does a good job of this lesson. There wasn't really anything for me to change or to give any kind of negative thing about. So I just tried to add a few aspects to it, add a few discussion questions. Hope you have a great lesson, and we'll see you on Sunday.